here. Okay. All right. So another week has passed by, and it seems like we might have a couple new members in the class today. Maybe I'm wrong, because I surely don't remember everybody. But if you happen to be at your first class or haven't spoken up and kind of let us know how you found out about the classes, we'd love to hear from you. All you do is unmute yourself, or you could raise your hand. I can see you right now. Well, maybe everybody's been here before.
Hello.
Hey, Dan. Actually, I think you were here last week, weren't you?
I was, and I really found the class informative, and I'm back this week. I used that app a little bit, the Daily Dozen, and had some questions about it too. So,
well, that's what we're here for, to start the meeting out. So why don't you ask away at the questions? It's good to see you back in the room.
Well, thank you very much. One of the questions I had, I looked at the different categories of food on the Daily Dozen, and I was curious what you thought about protein bars, because there's a vegan protein bar at work. It's called No Cow, and has a lot of protein in it, like 20 grams a bar, and no dairy products apparently. And I didn't see that on the app or anything. I was wondering if that's compatible with the kind of diet that we're talking about.
So I don't necessarily have to take that question. Scott, you can chime in if you like. I know you're chomping at the bit. Like,
yeah, sure. Well, yeah, that would be
us are like, okay, yeah, we're ready to answer that one.
Yeah, so that's not that there's anything wrong with having that once in a while for a snacks. It is vegan and whatnot, but I'd have to look at the food label to see how much, if it has added sugar or how much sodium it has, if it has oil. But in general, we try to encourage people to eat whole foods and not so that would be considered a processed food.
Okay.
So, and they tend to be expensive and stuff. But if you're you're going out the door and you need a quick snack and it's once in a great while, it's probably okay. Again, I'd have to look at the label to tell you how good or bad it is.
But because it's been processed, it's not really on raisins. I didn't see raisins on the app. Are raisins like?
So that you could consider that a serving of fruit. So yeah. Dried fruit would be okay. It just is a little bit higher in calories because it's had the water sucked out of it. But dried fruit, as long as it doesn't have added sugar or things to it, like raisins, for example, like you brought up, is fine. You just the calorie density of dried fruit is about 1,200 calories per pound, whereas whole fruit is only about 300 calories per pound. So if you're trying to lose weight, you're better off eating fresh fruit than dried fruit. But otherwise, there's nothing wrong with dried fruit.
Okay.
So I'd like to add a little bit to that, because I can't hardly stand not to chime in occasionally. Scott knows that. So remember. So protein is one of the first issues that comes up with most anyone who has been used to eating the standard American diet. And we in our country have been pretty much living under the myth that we are not getting enough protein. Everything that you see on TV is protein this and protein that. And actually too much protein is hard on the kidneys, which has led to an increase in kidney disease. And so the deficiency in our diet is not protein. If you were to ask me about fiber, then I'd be just jumping up and down saying, Dan gets it. This is what this is about. Fiber. For every 10 grams of fiber you add to your diet, you decrease your colon cancer risk by 10%, your heart attack risk by 10%. For those who have problems potentially with breast cancer, it's an 8% reduction. So fiber is what is the food for our microbiome, which the microbiome produces these chemicals like butyrate and serotonin that decrease the inflammation in our body. Inflammation is one of the root causes of chronic illness. So the more butyrate we get, the healthier we become. And you don't make as much butyrate, or the bacteria in your colon don't make as much butyrate unless they get fiber. It's not protein that they need. And you get more than enough protein if you're eating enough calories in your diet.
Right. Well, I do eat a cereal like Kashi cereal that has cinnamon harvest. I mean, that probably has fiber and some fruit that I eat, like bananas and apples. Is that pretty good?
So kasha is close to a whole grain cereal. Hopefully they're not putting sugar, free sugar into that cereal. If you ate the kasha or kasha, I think is
Kashi
is like it's not kamut, but what's the grain?
It's says
Buckwheat. It's
yeah,
buckwheat.
I'm not I'm not sure. It looks like shredded wheat, sort of, but it has some cinnamon maybe mixed in, like cinnamon harvest or some. That's the flavor. It's called cinnamon harvest.
Yeah,
Kashi
so cinnamon is okay, but look for the, if they're adding free sugars and if they've stripped out some of the fiber, that's not as healthy as eating oatmeal or eating just buckwheat by itself, or eating bulgur or kamut or quinoa. There's a number of whole grains, even brown rice. Those are really healthy options to, fill you up, give you plenty of calories, and get fiber into your life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you'll learn more as time goes on here.
Yeah, y'all have a class on food label reading coming up in several weeks down the road, but you can also look on the class archives to the food label reading class from last year if you want some instruction on how to read a food label now and not have to wait for the class in the future.
And if you ever have doubt in your mind as to whether a food is healthy or not, ask yourself this question. Does it grow on a tree that I could pick it? Does it grow in the ground that I can pull it out like a root vegetable? That's how it's grown in nature, that I can kind of rinse it off and wash it and either eat it either raw or cooked. Does it grow like a grain like oats or wheat? And has it been stripped of its fiber, or is it have most all of its fiber intact? If you ask yourself those questions, you'll wind up eating whole foods as they're grown in nature, and that will be the healthiest choice. And like Scott said, occasionally you may want to drift off to some other treat, which doesn't become a standard food for you, but maybe a treat intermittently, a small amount.
Okay.
Can I just say something really quick?
Velvet, you can always say something.
Hi, Dan. My name's Velvet. I've been doing this a couple years, and I just want to say I know it seems really overwhelming in the beginning, and it took like 6 months to a year to like really retrain my mind, like my brain, on how I ate and how this all looked. And there's gonna be things like you're gonna see a protein bar and be in a hurry, and it happens. But it takes time, and you just gotta retrain your mind on how you relearn everything about nutrition that you've ever been taught, because it is really confusing. But just give it time and don't get overwhelmed, because Scott and Charlie do use a lot of big words, and it seems like a lot sometimes, but just keep going with it and you will get there. And there is a lot of benefit to this.
Okay, so, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Velvet.
Thank you, Velvet.
Of course.
Who else has some comments or a comment or a question?
It's a good segue into gastrointestinal health, right?
Yeah. We are going to go there. I just want to see if Lisa has anything that she wants to contribute before we continue on. It's good to see you in class here.
Hi, yes, I've been away for a little bit. Actually, I've been over there, Dr. S. No, it's
And
good to see everyone. I was just gonna say we have our next book club meeting this Thursday for How Not to Die, which is really probably like the nutrition Bible. So it'll be a good book for anyone just starting, or maybe you've already read it and want to share your thoughts and reread it with us. It'll be over 3 months, so you'll have plenty of time to get through it. And if you don't finish the reading, that's fine too. We just like to hear different experiences because it'll be a group of students, patients like yourselves, and healthcare professionals. So it's always a good chance to hear different perspectives.
I encourage everybody to consider attending the book club. It's a fun thing to do. It's a combination of the community. It has some medical students also that are involved. It's kind of a combined group. It's fun, it's educational, and you won't be sorry you attended.
You can access it off of have it on the class newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to the Sunday morning weekly class newsletter, you can get to it off the website. And if anyone has a question about that, I can show that on the website.
So Scott, is there anything you want to particularly share about GI from the website, or should I start with Bernard?
Yeah, I'll show it's a good way to show the website here.
Okay.
And then, so let me go here. So here's the homepage of the website, and I just recorded on Sunday, 2 days ago, I recorded a new website tutorial. So if you're new to the website, click on this video here. It's about 20 minutes long. I give you a full tour of how to do everything on the website, where to find everything. So you can check that out. So it's just livelifestylemedicine.com is the address. But regarding today's class, we'll go to the resources tab, and we'll go to links to books. And so we have books that we recommend for a lot that are associated with these different classes that we do. And if you scroll down, we'll find the Gastrointestinal Health class right here. This is a book we recommend, Fiber Fueled by Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. He's a GI doctor, a gastroenterologist, and it's a real good one. So recommend that. And it goes with that. And I don't think I have any specific, we'll go to the handouts for class. I don't think I have any specific ones for tonight's class, other than the 3 weeks ago when we had the fiber class, the Magic of Fiber Charlie did, which is on the class archives. I have the fiber checklist from Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM here. But I think that's the only ones that I have that are related, anything related to this class as far as handouts. But yeah, and then again, if you're new to the website, go back to the home page, and you can sign up right here, subscribe to the weekly class newsletter. And on that newsletter every week has all the information about the book club, about the upcoming events. And you'll see we're having our walk, our Eugene Plant-Based Provider Community Walks coming up this coming Saturday at 11 o'clock at South Eugene High School, same place we had it last month. So all the information and stuff's in the newsletter, and that's it.
Anybody have any questions about the website or access or what's on it, or? Anybody have any other questions or comments before we continue on? We want these classes to be for you. Yes, Marcia.
I just
Fire
think
away.
the website is wonderful. I think you've done a great job with it, and I think it's easy to follow. So kudos to those who present it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Scott is keeping that up, and he's done a wonderful job of managing it for sure.
Yeah, Tammy Parks, she built the website for us. She was a student that came to class for quite a long time, and she has expertise in that. And then she taught me how to maintain it, so I can post all the videos and add content and whatnot. So she gave me, on her own time, gave me lessons on how to maintain a website. So it's thanks to her.
So for those of you, I think you can kind of see on your screen, there's enough of us here, not too many tonight. So I just want to introduce you to Kalyani Kennedy. She's a second-year med student who has developed a sincere interest in focusing attention and on this lifestyle medicine topic and food in particular. And we are looking for help for Lisa. She has plenty of, she's had time to coach and counsel people, but we want to continue to train others and who are able to do a similar kind of helping class members for free. And so I just wanted to introduce you to her, and thanks for attending. Say hello.
Yeah, so hi everybody. This is a really wonderful class every week, and I enjoy learning and learning more about everybody here. So I'm here to help in any way I can.
Well, thank you for coming and showing the interest. Lisa Chick started out about your time, maybe just even a little before. And she's really a wonderful mentor at this particular point in time. And so I think you might have met at one time briefly, but if you haven't, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of each other. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and continue on, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, it looks like there's some messages in the chat.
Yeah, I've been answering them.
Okay, you're taking care of what needs to be taken care of. Good. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get on first with Dr. Neil Bernard, and he's going to talk about all things GI. And I just need to find it here. So where is it? It's not here. It's not here. It's here. Digestive health. I've been showing this for a number of years just because it's basic and because it's pretty good.
Today we're going to talk about our digestive tract. You know, there is probably no part of the body that is as affected by foods as our digestive tract because it's really the beachhead. It's where foods occur first. So let's take a look from the top all the way down to the bottom of how foods can affect us. First thing, gastroesophageal reflux, GERD, heartburn. That's when the stomach, which has acid in it, is allowing that acid to go up back into the esophagus, so you feel this burning sensation back behind your chest. Well, what causes it? We don't really know what causes it for everybody, but here are the most common suspects. Having extra weight, meaty diets, and other fatty foods. For some folks, it might be caffeine or alcohol. Peppermint is an interesting one. It actually loosens up that muscle at the top of the stomach, allowing the acid to come through. For some folks, it might be chocolate. But what we see a lot of the time is when people lose weight and when they go on low-fat vegan diets, for whatever reason, their GERD often cleans up. Irritable bowel. Irritable bowel syndrome is where your digestive tract really isn't your friend anymore. One day it's constipation, the next day it might be diarrhea. It really can't make its mind up. And you have pain with it and you have bloating with it. Well, one of the most common contributors to this can be milk products. Milk contains a sugar called lactose. And have you heard of lactose intolerance? It's a totally normal condition. All it means is that you're not a baby anymore, so you don't have the enzymes anymore for digesting milk. And this is actually the biological norm. What I mean by that is if you were to test adults all around the world, most of them have lactose intolerance. They no longer have the enzymes for digesting milk. So the lactase enzyme breaks the lactose into two smaller sugars, glucose and galactose, and once that enzyme is gone, you're stuck with this big load of lactose going down into your intestinal tract. Bacteria ferment it, they make gas, and that's a big cause of irritable bowel. Solution: leave the milk and dairy products off your plate. Very easy. Now, there are some other contributors too, not just dairy products. For some people, artificial sweeteners, if they're using a lot of them, can irritate their digestive tract. Fatty foods can as well. When fat touches the intestinal wall, it causes the muscles to contract a little bit, and sometimes it's a little bit like squeezing a tube of toothpaste on both ends at the same time. Ouch. Some people might have a problem with wheat, some with eggs. Peppermint oil might actually help because in this case, it relaxes the muscles of the digestive tract. Now, even more serious, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. These are inflammatory conditions. If you could look at the intestinal tract, it looks angry. It's red and it's inflamed, and sometimes it earns you a trip to the operating room. Well, see your doctor if you have these conditions by all means, but be conservative. If you don't have to have surgery, by all means put it off. And doctors are now looking at diet changes that might help. We're seeing this especially with Crohn's disease. For some reason, many people do very well when they get away from dairy products. High fiber foods used to be forbidden for people. Now we know that they're the best thing for you. So that means well-cooked beans and vegetables and fruits, whole grains. You might want to go easy on the raw vegetables and fruits if you're having trouble with them. Let's talk about gallstones. Gallstones can be really painful, but there's a lot we can do with our diet to improve things. The liver makes something called bile. It's a digestive juice. It helps us to break apart the foods that we're eating. The liver takes this bile, it sends it into the gallbladder where it's stored, and then after you eat a meal, it goes down the common bile duct and it goes into the intestinal tract to help us digest food. But sometimes this bile starts to crystallize. It's like it's forming little nuggets right in the gallbladder or elsewhere in that biliary tree. This is the pancreas, and you can see right there on the left-hand side there is a spot where a gallstone perhaps could form. Ouch, you don't want that. Well, if you could look at them under a microscope, what you discover is they're mostly made of cholesterol. So the solution to gallstones, surprisingly enough, is very much like the solution for heart problems. We want to lower our cholesterol. That means reducing the fat in our diet, especially the animal fat. Get that out of the diet. Increasing high fiber foods. That's whole grains and beans and vegetables and fruits. And losing weight in a healthful way is really important too. Now, sometimes when people lose weight really too fast by starving themselves, sometimes gallstones can actually form. So what you want to do is to follow a low-fat, plant-based diet, and the weight loss is healthy and gradual. Let's talk about colon cancer. It's a serious condition, and it's particularly common in westernized countries. Why would that be? Well, it turns out that it's strongly linked to a meat-based diet. If you compare people who rarely have meat to men or women who have meat more or less every day, those who have it about every day have roughly 3 times the risk of developing colon cancer compared to people who don't eat meat or eat it only very rarely. Well, why would that be? Why would meat lead to colon cancer? Well, first of all, fatty foods actually change your intestinal bacteria. Did you know that you have bacteria in your intestine? That's perfectly normal. But if you feed them a fatty diet, it's a funny way to think about it, but that's what we're doing, those bacteria actually change. They become the kind of bacteria that can produce carcinogens from your own digestive juices. So you don't want to be feeding a lot of fatty foods to them. That means getting away from the meat. Secondly, you need fiber in your diet, but meat doesn't have any fiber. It's not from a plant, so it doesn't have plant roughage. And if you don't have fiber in your diet, what happens to your digestion? It slows down. And if it slows down, then anything that's there, any carcinogen, cancer-causing chemical, that might be working its way down your digestive tract, it stays there that much longer. And that's not good. So we want fiber in our diet. And third, cooking can produce some cancer-causing chemicals, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But you really want to bring back the fiber, and let me remind you of these numbers. We've talked about this before, but a typical serving of beans, about 7 grams of fiber, Vegetables about 4, a typical fruit like an apple or an orange, maybe about 3 grams. Bread, a little bit lower, a little bit higher depending on the type. Cold cereals, roughly 3 grams per serving. Oatmeal, about 4. Earlier I said that cooking can be a problem. A lot of people are getting away from fried chicken. That's a good choice. You'll skip a lot of fat. But some of them are switching to grilled chicken. And killjoy that I am, I have to say, I went and tested what's in grilled chicken. You know those black grill lines that you see? Well, it turns out when you send a little bit of that material to a lab and ask what's in it, they come back with something called FIP. Here it is. This will not be on the test, but this is the chemical structure of FIP. It's a carcinogen. That is, it's a cancer-causing chemical. How is it produced? When you grill skeletal muscle, I'm talking about the muscle of an animal. It could be a fish, it could be a chicken, or it could be beef. When it's cooked at that high grilling temperature, these carcinogens form. My team went to McDonald's. We went to Applebee's and Burger King and Chick-fil-A, Chili's, Outback, and TGI Fridays, and we took their grilled chicken sandwiches and grilled chicken salads. We sent them to a laboratory, and you know what? We found this FIP carcinogen in every single sample at every single one of these restaurants. So it's a reliable thing. If you want to avoid these carcinogens, the answer is pick something other than that grilled chicken. By the way, if you grilled vegetables, these cancer-causing chemicals don't form. It's formed when you heat up muscle tissue, that's meat, at a very high temperature. We've got more good news when it comes to colon cancer. Not only can we make diet changes to help prevent it, it turns out that a person who has been already diagnosed with colon cancer, if they make diet changes, they go to a plant-based diet, a high-fiber diet, it improves the odds of survival. And let me get even a little bit more personal, if I may. Let's talk about hemorrhoids. Years ago, a wonderful researcher named Dr. Dennis Burkitt started looking at why certain conditions are really common in Europe and America, but rare in Africa and other countries. And what he found is that if you're not eating fiber, well, what happens? You get constipated, but people spend a lot of time in the bathroom because they're constipated. And if that happens, then they start pushing extra hard. Are you with me? Well, if you're pushing hard because a person's trying to go to the bathroom, what happens is the blood vessels of the lower part of the abdomen start engorging with blood, and that's the cause of hemorrhoids. And you know what? The most grateful letters that I get from people are not from people where their diabetes went away or we've cured their cholesterol problem, but when their hemorrhoids went away, I got to tell you, that's one grateful person. Similarly, at the top part of the abdomen, your stomach is up there, and when a person is pushing really hard in the bathroom, their stomach can actually lift up through the diaphragm. That causes what we call a hiatal hernia, and that's cause of heartburn. So very simple. Bring the fiber back in the diet. There's no more constipation. Going to the bathroom is an easy thing, and it's not a big issue anymore, okay? So we've talked about problems from the top to the bottom, and it's easy. A low-fat vegan diet, keeping the oils out of the diet, bringing the high-fiber foods in, that's going to really help your digestive tract and make you feel better too. Thanks a lot.
You. He tries to keep it simple. He covered a number of topics. Some of you may have problems with GERD or irritable bowel or Crohn's disease or worried about colon cancer. So now's an opportunity for you to ask a question or two about any of those issues. I think you understand that Dr. Barnard's main message was eat more plants for more fiber, plants that are grown in nature. He didn't say eat processed food, and eat less of the animal products, particularly meat and dairy, to get more fiber. So you have close to a raised hand, I think, Dan. You could unmute if you have a question, or maybe there's someone else.
Yeah, sure. I'm really interested in this, and I do eat some whole foods. I have noticed that I still eat processed vegan foods. Like there are these microwavable dinners that are vegan, and I guess that doesn't qualify as a whole food because like you can add stuff to it. Maybe they add sugar to it or something, but put it all into whole food. I think is probably an admirable goal from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, you're going to hear that message kind of repeated over and over again. And it doesn't have to happen in one day. It can be a gradual transition. Some people need time to kind of adjust the amount of fiber that they're getting in their diet. So, but keep that thought and wavelength in front of your mind or inside your mind, everywhere in your mind, that what the goal is here is to increase the number of really healthy foods and reduce the ones that aren't quite as healthy.
But just for the record, that same doctor, Dr. Neil Barnard, he will talk about processed vegan foods, that are, considers those a good transition food. So if you're going from from bacon double cheeseburgers, jumping straight to steamed kale and beans might be a pretty steep jump, right? That might be overwhelming.
Right.
So he actually says, if you want to transition with some processed vegan foods, some, vegan sausage, vegan, Impossible burgers, things like that. Yeah, those aren't the ultimate goal or the healthiest thing, but that might be a good, good transition food, so to speak.
Okay.
So don't feel discouraged.
Don't feel
about
overwhelmed
that.
and don't feel overwhelmed and quit just because I can't get it perfectly the first time, but just
exactly
realize what the right direction is, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's what kind of Velvet was alluding to also with their comments. Marcia.
Yeah, I know. I know when I started on my whole food plant-based giant, it's a rocky road. It isn't easy because if you don't know where to find the recipes to give you that food where you get, I know today my goal is to eat a lot of fiber and then I can have big poop. And to me, that's a joy. Woo-hoo.
Along that line, Dr. Burkett, who he mentioned, says that people who have a lot of illness, they need countries that have a lot of illness, they need large hospitals. They have small bowel movements, small amount of poop. Whereas those who have very little illness or they're eating really a lot of fiber, they have small hospitals. Joan.
I had reason to go to the Crescent Street OMG clinic this week. And when I went into the office, I saw the Live Lifestyle Medicine flyer on the bulletin board. And I said, oh, this is really great. And then the nurse said, wow, you've lost a lot of weight. And I said, because of Live Lifestyle Medicine. And then I told the physician assistant, I said, if you have patients with constipation issues, you really need to recommend this Live Lifestyle Medicine.
Well, thank you for doing that. That's how the word's going to keep getting spread. And it really is important for the nurses and the providers to really understand the benefit of people attending these classes, learning and making some healthier choices. Scott?
Yeah. I send out that flyer to all the providers at Oregon Medical Group every month, and so I was just at after hours at Crescent on Friday night. So I see it in the rooms. It's great.
All right, let's see if there are any other questions. I know, Marcia, we may have cut you off a little bit. Did you have any other question to add?
No, I didn't have any other question. I just thought it was I just know the value of whole food and the importance that it has in. When I started out, I had arthritis in my hand, and I thought, wow, what am I going to do about that? But I knew it was inflammation, so I asked the question. It took me to Dr. Neil Barnard, and he said, don't eat meat, dairy, or oil. Well, it wasn't quite as succinct as that, but it's a, and I think the journey is, it's, to me, it was a rocky road trying to figure out what to eat at the beginning. I know I got the Vegan Starter Cookbook by Dr. Neil Barnard, and that was one of my first cookbooks. And I think the first recipe I tried was how to make refried beans. Huh. But you learn as you go, and it gets better, it gets easier. Now I have a whole bunch of whole food plant-based cookbooks. So it's a wonderful thing. I can't say enough good things about it.
Well, thank you for those comments. All right, I'm going to go back to gallery view and see if there are any other comments from anybody, any other thoughts? Anybody want to share anything that's going through your mind? So Jerry asked me to tell you my story of what happened to me at Volunteer in Medicine this week. A couple of my last patients, the next to last patient I saw was a lady who was started on some metformin for her diabetes, and she took that medicine, but it gave her stomach ache and her heart raced, and she had been placed on about a month before by a doctor who saw that her hemoglobin A1C went from normal a year before to 8 value. And she thought, well, this medicine bothers me, and I was eating at a birthday party, and so I think it was an error. So she came back to get her blood work repeated and had the hemoglobin A1C repeated, and it was 7.7, which was a little lower, but still quite high and in the diabetic range. She told me she didn't really want to take any medicine, and I said, has anybody ever talked to you about actually changing what you're eating? And she said, no. And so we went through, I had her download Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen app. I went through each of the foods. She seemed to like the foods. She says, I can do this. She says she was really enthusiastic, and she was Spanish speaking only. I had to use an interpreter who is a new interpreter for me. And he was interpreting all this back and forth. And at the end, he kind of was smiling a little bit and said to me, kind of, wow, but that was kind of interesting. And then we went to the next patient, and the next patient, a month before, I had counseled him about, again, downloaded Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen app, and he had high blood pressure, and he didn't want to take pills. And so his blood pressure was like a 120 over 78. It was perfectly normal. He had been taking it at home. His blood pressures were all fine. He had made the transition to mostly all whole plant foods. His wife had done the same. He lost 4 pounds over the last month. He was happy as could be. And his wife had a smile from ear to ear that she was feeling better and loved eating what they were eating and how things were going in their life. And at the end of hearing their story and seeing how to try to transition a patient to a different lifestyle, the interpreter said, I need to consider doing this. So needless to say, I bounced out of the building very happy. It was a very fun shift. I love that kind of work, helping people make the transition. And I'd love to see the younger providers learn how to do that, and even the older ones, so that they could find as much joy in their practice and help their patients as much. Okay, that's as short as I could make it. Now, any other thoughts from anyone before we get on to a GI specialist? I'm kind of just looking around and I don't see anybody. Let's see, there's more than one room that I need to look at. Okay, I don't see anybody. These sessions again are for you, and we welcome any questions you have. Don't feel shy. You can speak up. No one's going to criticize you for asking a question. But with that said, let's see if I can share the screen. When we get done with this is a little longer video. It's about 23 minutes. But I think you'll enjoy what Dr. Desmond has to say. He's kind of fun to listen to. I enjoy him, and others have too. So here we go. Alan Desmond, gut health, how a plant-based diet, how it helps.
Great, thanks Shireen. And thanks to everyone who managed to find the room. So it took me about 45 minutes. So well done everybody for finding your way. And thanks to the guys doing the BSL interpretation today. So they've told me they're going to try and sign an Irish accent for me. So I'm not sure how they're going to do that. So lovely to see you all. There's a few more people coming in, so come on in and have a seat. And there's loads of people leaving. Anyway, it's lovely to be here. Thanks very much. Well done for Shireen and all the team who've done far more. I'm basically just turning up and giving my talk. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm kind of I've put a pretty lofty question there for a gastroenterologist. Can a plant-based diet change your world? So I'm a medical doctor. I work at Torbay Hospital. I've got a small private clinic as well. I went to medical school in Cork, in University College Cork, and practiced medicine there. I graduated medical school in 2001. So I'm very much a conventional and mainstream medical doctor. So a part of this talk is about where are we with that now in 2019. Over a century ago, Thomas Edison predicted that the doctor of the future would actually give no medicine, but would instruct his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. I think he'd already recognized in the early 20th century that lifestyle medicine and unlocking lifestyle medicine might be the key to keeping people healthy and helping them to stay healthy. Unfortunately, over a century later, as physicians, we have completely missed the mark on that. To the point that in this opinion piece in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of Medical Ethics, it's a mouthful, last year, David Katz made this statement in a kind of a rallying call to doctors around the world to sort of wake up to the need for more diet and lifestyle advice as part of conventional medicine. And it's sad but true, but the food that we eat now is now the main determinant of poor health in the Western world. So food, as he says, has undergone a truly dramatic transformation from essential sustenance into the single leading contributor to chronic disease and premature death. So can a plant-based diet change your world? So I'm going to talk mostly about my own areas of expertise, which are about gut health, health and longevity, asking can a plant-based diet help you to avoid long-term disease and long-term medication? And then I'm going to address some of the other questions that may not be my areas of expertise, but they always come up, and I hear people talking and asking about them a lot. Could you somehow be leaner or maybe even more athletic on a plant-based diet? Can you tread more softly on our planet? And can a plant-based diet help you to exercise compassion? But before we do all that, let's come back into my clinic. So the reason that I advocate and recommend a whole food plant-based diet isn't because I went to medical school and I was a vegan at medical school. The opposite may be true, actually. But really, it was my patients who brought me to a whole food plant-based diet. So one of the things that I spend a lot of my time treating, even since I I think as a very newly qualified doctor back in 2002. So for the last 17 years, on a day-to-day basis, I've been involved in treating people with a condition called inflammatory bowel disease. Now, these are a group of conditions, these inflammatory bowel diseases, where sections of your bowel become inflamed and damaged and dysfunctional. We have medications that can help to reduce the inflammation, but very seldom get people into complete remission. For example, with Crohn's disease, which is about half the cases of inflammatory bowel disease, half of the patients who are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease are going to end up having surgery to remove part of their bowel, basically to remove a diseased part of their bowel because it's not functioning anymore. Almost all of our patients with inflammatory bowel disease end up on long-term medication, and being diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease is no fun. Most people with inflammatory bowel disease would describe their health as being below good. And the rates of work absenteeism and school absenteeism are very high. And in fact, the inflammatory bowel diseases are diagnosed at a median age of about 30. So these are usually young people in the prime of their lives. They're working, they've got mortgages, they've got young kids, and now they're being told that they've got to come to the doctor's office every 3 months. And there's a good chance they're going to end up on some medication that means they're going to have to come up to a day ward every 8 or 12 weeks and sit in a room that looks a bit like a chemotherapy day unit, to be honest, and go on a drip and have medication to keep their inflammation under control. Now, when I was at medical school, we were taught that inflammatory bowel disease was kind of the paradigm of an autoimmune condition. You've gotten unlucky in the genetic lottery. There's something wrong with your immune system, so it's attacking your guts. So that's it, you're stuck with it, and we've got some medication that can help. But in fact, the more I've looked at it, the more I've realized, and mainstream gastroenterology is moving this way, that there's a lot you can do with diet and lifestyle. So your future's not set in stone when it was coming to inflammatory bowel disease. And whenever I would see or have or meet a patient who's been just diagnosed with one of these conditions, they'd already figured out that there was something to do with food here. So I've heard people asking the same question since my first day on the GI unit back in 2002. Okay, so I've been diagnosed with this, you've explained all that stuff to me. Is there anything I can do with food? And they don't mean, is there any food I should eat today to feel better or worse? What they mean is there any food I should be avoiding that can help me prevent that progression you've just described with more and more medication and increasing likelihoods of having surgery? In medicine, we're all about trying to give our patients evidence-based answers. So we'll only give our patients advice or a medication if we can look at medical studies that show us that they work. So that's a big stack of medical journals there to illustrate the fact that I've read loads of medical journals. Because over the years, particularly since becoming a consultant in 2012 and more recently the lead for treatment of inflammatory bowel disease at my hospital, I've been trawling through the mainstream medical literature so I could give my patients evidence-based answers. And I guess what I learned was there's a lot of very strong evidence out there, lots of stuff about inflammatory bowel disease that I never learned at medical school. So I learned that IBD is not just a genetic disease. There are a lot of various factors in the etiology of inflammatory bowel disease. And there's a huge amount of evidence that diet is extremely important, both in the cause of and the progress of inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease didn't really exist as an entity in the early 20th century, but now it affects 1 in 300 people in Europe. Perhaps 1 in 200 people in the UK now has inflammatory bowel disease. You probably all know someone who has ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. When we look at the epidemiological data, there's very, very clear story that as countries industrialize their environment and industrialize their food chain, these diseases start to come up and start to get diagnosed. We saw it in Europe and the United States and Australia in the post-war years, and then more recently as countries like Japan and Egypt, etc., have westernized their lifestyles and westernized their diets, they're starting to see these diagnoses appearing. In fact, the Lancet Medical Journal a couple of years ago highlighted this issue in a huge editorial piece and just warned us that inflammatory bowel disease is actually a slow epidemic. In a few years, we're not going to have the resources to treat all these patients. And when we zoom in on the dietary risk factors, there's really compelling evidence that shows that dietary fiber, just the fiber that you get from eating plants and whole grains and vegetables, actually strongly protects you from developing inflammatory bowel disease. And there's strong evidence that eating the animal protein, so the more animal protein you eat in your diet, the more likely you are to develop inflammatory bowel disease. There's plenty of studies showing that dairy fat can induce inflammatory bowel disease. And there's some really, really interesting research that we could have spent the whole day on today on the effects of animal-based diet on the gut microbiome. So we've seen studies where you take people and you put them on a very animal product heavy diet, and their gut microbiome changes into a pro-inflammatory gut microbiome, which is actually capable of inducing inflammatory bowel disease. And there have been so many studies showing that food additives that we get in processed foods, like emulsifiers, polysorbate, maltodextrin, carrageenan, the evidence showing that these food additives are so pro-inflammatory in the intestine, particularly in patients with inflammatory bowel disease, that a few years ago a team of researchers wrote to the Journal of Crohn's and Colitis and said, we've cracked it. Emulsifiers are causing Crohn's disease. They called it the emulsifier hypothesis of Crohn's disease. But in a way they were right, but it's a much bigger story than that. So over the years, because I would go and look at all these various studies from disparate sources, these epidemiological studies, lab studies, dietary intervention studies, I slowly came up with this green list and this red list. So when my patients say to me, is there anything I should eat? Is there anything I should avoid? I came to the point where I would say to them, well, look, I'd prefer if you totally cut out processed foods and really avoided animal protein and animal fat and dairy. And I want you to avoid, in particular, food emulsifiers that are found in a lot of processed foods. And I want you to avoid the food additives that are found in a lot of processed foods. And I want you to build your diet around whole, unprocessed foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, walnuts, flax seeds, beans and seeds, and whole grains. So before I even knew what a whole food plant-based diet was, I was already recommending to my patients that a whole food plant-based diet is really what the evidence tells us. If you want evidence-based answers, there's your evidence-based answer. Eat a whole food plant-based diet. It's impossible to read all that research about Crohn's and colitis without reading a lot more research about the effect of diet on the diseases and disorders that I see in my clinic every day, that we see on our hospital wards every day, or in our GP's offices, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't go through all of these, but it turns out that a whole food plant-based diet seems to tick all the right boxes for long-term gut health, whichever of these conditions you're looking for. So diverticular disease is a condition whereby you get these little pouches in the side of your bowel, predominantly your large bowel. They can get clogged up, they get infected. Your gut gets inflamed around the pouches. You can get stricturing. You can end up having a perforation or an abscess. You can end up in hospital. You can even have part of your bowel removed due to diverticular disease. Now, gladly, most people with diverticular disease don't end up seriously unwell, but they do have bothersome symptoms and it reduces their quality of life. We've known since the 1970s, when Dennis Burkitt was writing about his experience as a surgeon working in London and working in rural Africa, that among populations who eat a whole food plant-based diet, particularly a high fiber diet, nobody gets diverticular disease. Yet diverticular disease affects about 80% of 80-year-olds here in the UK, about 30% of 30-year-olds. And in fact, in the US, you can almost call it ubiquitous. If you live long enough in the United States, you're probably going to get diverticular disease. And if you have diverticular disease, and if you look at the studies showing, well, what are the characteristics of your diet that predict running into trouble with your diverticular disease? It's high meat and low fiber are going to run you into trouble. I'm just going to talk a little bit about colon cancer. Unfortunately, in my job, I sit down with people all the time and I tell them that I've just diagnosed them with colon cancer. So I might do that once, twice, or 3 times per week. Now, that's always a very difficult conversation, and I'm very aware that that person's going to remember that conversation forever, and it's going to change their life forever. Even if they do really, really well, it's going to change their life forever. So what about a whole food plant-based diet and colon cancer? Well, we know, even Cancer Research UK, who would be relatively conservative in their estimates, would estimate that 55% of cases of colon cancer in the UK are due to 3 factors, one of 3 factors: low fiber diet, red and processed meat consumption, and being overweight or obese. Just those 3 things. So 55% of the 42,000 cases of colon cancer that occur in the UK every year are entirely preventable by diet and lifestyle. And I haven't even mentioned alcohol and smoking. Just food we eat and physical exercise and maintaining a healthy body weight could dramatically reduce the numbers of patients who have that difficult conversation with somebody like me every year. Just at the end there, NASH cirrhosis. So NASH is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or fatty liver disease, or foie gras liver, if you want. So this is a condition whereby you have fat deposited on your liver. Your liver doesn't like having fat deposited on it, which causes the liver to be inflamed. And about 10% of people with NASH, that condition, will end up developing cirrhosis of the liver in about 8 or 9 years. That's without touching a drop of alcohol. It's completely separate to alcohol or other chronic diseases of the liver. Having cirrhosis of the liver reduces your life expectancy. So it's surprising that this condition that wasn't even described in the medical literature 50 or 60 years ago now affects 20 to 30% of people in the UK. So we have an absolute epidemic of NASH cirrhosis. And when we look at the dietary risk factors for developing NASH and putting yourself at risk of NASH cirrhosis. It's the more animal products you consume and the more processed foods and free sugars that you consume. What's the antidote to that? Whole food, plant-based. We're seeing NASH cirrhosis all the time in our hospital wards now. And essentially what we're seeing, and I can think of maybe 2 or 3 episodes of this already this year, is we'll sometimes get, for example, you saw an elderly person who's been admitted to hospital with pneumonia or a urinary tract infection or some sort of infection that can be serious enough when you're old, but usually people get better from, and they've been in hospital for 2 or 3 days, and then they go yellow because they've become jaundiced, and then they become encephalopathic and drowsy, and then they go into a coma. And then we have to sit down with their family and say, well, actually, you know, your mum's dying now. She's got liver failure. And they say, well, why is that? So the scans show that she has cirrhosis of the liver. They say, well, she never drank a drop in her life. We said, we know. This is NASH cirrhosis. We're seeing it more and more. So as a gastroenterologist, I recommend a whole food plant-based diet rather than a Western diet. For the same reason that my friends who are orthopedic surgeons tell their patients not to go skiing, because they've seen the harm that it can do. And I see the harm that a standard Western diet does every day of the week. So that's how I kind of came to reading all this research and, you know, talking to my patients with GI problems about eating more whole food plant-based. But I guess it comes to a bigger question, doesn't it? So if diet is the problem, so as we said at the start, diet is the single biggest cause of death and disability, what's the solution? There's so many solutions offered out there in the public domain and within medical journals. So I might be telling you stuff you already know, but who hasn't heard of the blue zones? Okay, so I'm speaking to about 7 people here. Okay, that's great. Well, for all 7 of you, so about 16 years ago, Dan Buettner and a team of researchers, he was a journalist, he had a team of epidemiologists and medical specialists, and they went around the world looking for the people with the longest lived and healthiest lives in the world. And they found these 5 geographically diverse areas in Loma Linda, California, Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, Sardinia, Ikaria, Okinawa, Japan. And these were the areas in the world where not only, I mean, when you hear people talk about the blue zones, let's say, you're...
I'm going to stop there because we do blue zones in other sessions, and I just wanted to make sure that we got the main GI issues. He gives a pretty enthusiastic, inspiring talk about the benefits of why he, as a gastrointestinal specialist, chooses to recommend a whole food plant-based diet. And are there any of you who were like, I don't believe what he's saying, or, you know, what's really the evidence behind what he's saying there, or whatever? Did you find him believable? I mean, that's what you're hearing in these classes for those of you who have been coming week after week. It's just another area of the body in which making healthy choices in your diet is so important. Yes, Trouty.
The books say the same thing as what he says. So it's okay with me.
Okay, good. We've come to a similar conclusion. Velvet, you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, I just have to say he's right that I will never forget the conversation about me having colon cancer. It'll never go away, and it completely changed my life. And yes, I'm fine for anyone that doesn't know my story yet, but that changed everything about my life. And so he was just right about that.
So when you had that diagnosis and you made the decision to do something different, you might want to share that with the class to help them understand the struggle you had and how you've kind of overcome the barriers to this transitioning.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 2 colon cancer at 35 years old about 2 years ago. And I luckily caught it early, so I didn't have to have any treatment, but had 6 inches of my colon removed, which was a 6-week recovery, and it was awful in itself. I wish that upon no one. But after that, I just decided I wanted to control what I could. And the biggest thing that you can control is the things that you put in your mouth. and the products that you use. So that's what I did. And it took me a while to transition to this. But I've seen a lot of benefit. And I mean, I think just jumping in and every day changing things and making little changes is the best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure your family was not particularly excited about changing what they were eating. How have you dealt with that? And you know, it's sort of one of the barriers of people transitioning. They get blowback from family, friends, relatives.
Yeah, and I mean, I still get that to this day every once in a while, especially from my, children. But I think them seeing what I went through really helped that, and me explaining, this is my reason, and mom doesn't want to go back there. So I'm gonna provide you guys with healthy food in this house. They get to choose what they eat outside of this house because I can't control that. But just having that open conversation with them and having them understand what my reason was has helped enough. Sure, I still get the pushback and the roll of eyes, especially today when we go to the pediatrician and he's telling my kids they need to eat more protein. And Malachi is looking, my 18-year-old son, Malachi is looking at me like, Mom, don't say anything. But I know what I'm doing is right, and all I can do is help explain that to them, expose them to this as much as possible, and if they have questions, answer them.
Well, thanks for sharing your
You're
comments
welcome.
with the
Thank
class.
you.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute or ask or share or whatever it might be?
Dr. Desmond's a really good speaker. He was actually at the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine that I went to last August in Washington, D.C. He was actually there. And then we were having lunch, Angela and I were having lunch at a little cafe just a couple blocks from the hotel where the conference was. And he was there eating and talking with another one of the speakers. So I was next table over. Yeah, I love his accent.
Yeah, I do too. Mary, I think you had yourself unmuted for a moment. Maybe it was just
Yes.
Yeah,
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear me? So when I was living in Oak Ridge a few years ago, I was having all kinds of trouble with my intestines and severe constipation. And I knew something was really wrong, but I really didn't want to go to a doctor. So I started just trying different things. And when I cut out meat, I slowly started to feel a little bit better. And it didn't happen all at once. And I didn't know how to cook without meat. I was a hardcore carnivore. You have meat at every meal and lots of it. And then I considered Italian seasoning a vegetable. So I was pretty bad. And a friend of mine said, well, there's this guy in town who teaches vegetarian cooking. And I said, oh, where's he at? And she said, oh, at St. Vinny's. And so I went, and that turned out to be you and your class. And it just totally changed my life. And otherwise I was totally lost about what to do. So thank you for that free class. It wasn't exactly vegetarian cooking, but close enough.
Well, that brings back some good old memories for sure. Yeah, we started a class in Oak Ridge at St. Vinny's. It was a tiny little room, which could hold, I don't know, what, 8 people or something, maybe 10.
And then we had 12 or 14 and we were so crowded.
We eventually moved to the museum, which had much more room. Yeah, that was the good old days for sure.
Yes, and thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? We have plenty of videos, so you don't have to speak up. there's always another video, but we really love hearing your comments, taking your questions, and talking about what you'd like to talk about. All right, I'm going to play the next video and then one or two, and then we will come back and see if there are any questions. Sometimes you just have to develop you get through, I'm feeling nervous, scared about asking a question, how to develop a healthy gut ecosystem. Probably know the answer to that. Let's see what Dr. Greger has to say.
As I've explored before, whether you're young or old, male or female, smoker or non, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, high cholesterol or low, having high levels of a toxic compound called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, in your bloodstream is associated with a significantly higher risk of having a heart attack, stroke, or dying over a 3-year period. Where does TMAO come from? The choline in foods like eggs can be turned by gut bacteria into TMAO, which is then absorbed back into our system, and the more eggs we eat, the higher the levels climb. Given the similarity in structure between carnitine and choline, the same group of Cleveland Clinic researchers wondered if carnitine, found in red meat, energy drinks, and supplements, might also lead to TMAO production, so they put it to the test. If you feed someone a steak, their TMAO levels shoot up. Now, this was someone who regularly ate meat. Those who eat strictly plant-based may start out with almost no TMAO in their system, presumably because they're not eating any meat, eggs, or dairy. But even if the vegan eats a sirloin, almost no TMAO is made. Why? Presumably they don't have steak-eating bacteria in their guts. No TMAO is produced if you don't have TMAO-producing bacteria in your gut. If you don't regularly eat meat, then you're not fostering the growth of the meat-eating microbes that produce TMAO. This suggests that once we develop a plant-based gut ecosystem, our bacteria will not produce TMAO, even if we eat meat every once in a while. However, we still don't know how rapidly gut bacteria shifts after a shift in our diet, but it does not appear to be all or nothing. If you take men eating a standard American diet and have them eat 2 sausage, egg, and cheese biscuits before and after just 5 days of eating lots of high-fat meals like that, you can boost TMAO production even higher. So it's not just do you have the bad bugs or not, you can apparently breed more of them the more you feed them. On the other hand, meat-free diets have been demonstrated to have a profound influence on human metabolism. You can analyze a urine sample and tell what kind of diet people eat based on measurements like how low their TMAO levels are in the urine of those eating egg-free vegetarian diets. You can even take the same people and rotate them through 3 different diets, and you can tell who is who's on a high meat, low meat, or no meat diet, in part based on the different compounds churned out by the different gut flora or different flora activity after just about 2 weeks on the different diets. It's possible that some of the beneficial effects of whole plant foods may be mediated by the effects they have on our gut bacteria. At the same time, the standard American diet may increase the relative abundance of undesirables that produce toxic compounds, including the cardiotoxicant TMAO. Strictly plant-based diets have gained acceptance as a dietary strategy for preventing and managing disease, perhaps in part because of their rather unique gut flora, less of the disease-causing bacteria and more of the protective species. So all along, we thought the reason those eating plant-based had lower heart disease rates was because they were eating less saturated fat and cholesterol, but maybe their lower TMAO levels may also be contributing to their benefits thanks to their reduction of ingestion of carnitine and choline. I talked about the egg industry response to the choline revelation. How has the carnitine supplement industry reacted? Well, the former VP of Advocare, a multi-level marketing company that sells carnitine supplements like Slam, while getting slammed with lawsuits, finding them, for example, guilty of false, misleading, or deceptive practices, forced to pay over $1 million, In response to the research implicating carnitine in TMAO production, he questioned whether there was a secret vegan conspiracy at the Cleveland Clinic. Restricting our intake of meat or carnitine supplements to prevent our gut bacteria from making TMAO, he argues, is like trying to prevent car accidents by restricting the sale of fuel. Okay, but there are benefits to transportation. We're talking about TMAO, which may be fueling our epidemic of heart disease, the #1 killer of men and women in this country. As far as I'm concerned, the more we can cut the fuel for that, the better.
So, by that video, it just brings back thinking about our microbiome and how we can regulate the type of bacteria in our microbiome, the large colon, where we have trillions of bacteria. If we feed them the good bacteria, their food, they will feed us back. And so their food for our good bacteria is fiber. If we feed our microbiome bacteria meat, dairy, and eggs, we are going to populate our colon with the kind of bacteria that produce this toxic chemical that causes heart disease and chronic inflammation in our body called TMAO. Now, most of us probably wouldn't want to increase the TMAO once we understood the detrimental effects. But this has probably not been a topic that your doctor has discussed with you in the past, but it's something that we're hoping to grab your attention about, where you say, yeah, well, there is a reason why I'm eating more fiber. It's to encourage the growth of really healthy bacteria that don't produce these toxic products. And with that, I have one more video I want to share with you. Actually, I have more than one more, but the best diet for upset stomach. A number of you may have upset stomach at one time or another. Let's see what Dr. Greger has to say.
Dyspepsia is just a fancy word for an upset stomach. Feelings of fullness, discomfort, nausea, bloating, belching, affecting up to 1 in 5 individuals. In my last video, I talked about the risks associated with proton pump inhibitor drugs like Nexium, as well as folk remedies like baking soda. So all in all, studies have emphasized the unmet need for medications to treat patients with dyspepsia, but why not try food? One study put amalaki to the test, which is just another name for amla. They call it an Ayurvedic drug, but it's just a fruit, powdered Indian gooseberries. 1 teaspoon of dried Indian gooseberry powder 3 times a day versus an ounce of some gel and acid every 3 hours. And both work just as well. Significant decreases in peak acid output and a cutting of dyspepsia symptom scores in half. They conclude that amla is therefore better, it's about 100 times cheaper, about a penny a week instead of $1 a week, and more convenient than downing antacids 6 times a day. Though amla may be a safe, simple, natural remedy, such an approach is still very much in the pharmaceutical model of treating the symptoms rather than the underlying cause. Dyspepsia is not caused by a gooseberry deficiency. What is it caused by? Well, about 1 in 7 people describing a range of gastrointestinal symptoms feel better cutting out gluten. But for the other 86% of people, the most well-characterized trigger is high-fat meals. If you give people a fatty soup, just broth with added fat, it takes 3 times longer to empty from your stomach compared to the broth alone, like an hour and a half versus just a half hour. Now, the emptying rate didn't necessarily correlate with how people felt, but regardless, the fatty broth increased the severity and frequency of dyspepsia over the regular broth. What happens in dyspepsia is people become hypersensitive to the stretching of the stomach when you eat, but it also matters what you eat. The human stomach can normally accommodate about a quart of food, 1,000 milliliters, 4 cups. But if you stick a balloon into people's stomachs attached to a hose, people with dyspepsia will start feeling discomfort about here, only about 1.5 cups, when the stomach is less than half full. But that's when you're dripping fat into their gut. But if you're instead dripping sugar into their gut while you're blowing up the balloon, it can get up to here before causing discomfort in dyspeptics, about 70% more. And the same with fullness and nausea. Increase the pressure in the stomach with fat in there, and fullness and nausea shoot up. With fake fat in your stomach instead, the same pressures result in significantly less feelings of fullness and nausea. These studies show that during distension of the stomach, as the stomach fills up, dietary fats are a major trigger of dyspeptic symptoms such as nausea, pain, bloating, fullness, and they modulate symptoms in a dose-related fashion, meaning more fat, the worse people felt. These were some pretty elegant experiments, but also a bit artificial. I mean, we don't typically eat with balloons in our stomach, so how about an experiment using actual food? They compared yogurts high in sugar, low in fat, versus high in fat, low in sugar. Eating the low-fat yogurt, there wasn't much of a difference in the nausea, pain, and bloating scores between those with dyspepsia and healthy subjects, but give them the same amount of high-fat yogurt, and dyspepsia symptoms shot up almost immediately. So one of our major findings was that the induction of gastrointestinal symptoms after the test meals were nutrient-specific. The consumption of a high-fat test meal was associated with a substantially greater increase in nausea and pain when compared to a high-carbohydrate meal among those with dyspepsia, with the symptom scores increasing immediately after eating. This would suggest that sufferers not only reduce the amount of food they eat, which is the typical advice, but also try to keep the fat content down, a message echoed by a recent review of all such studies put together. Current studies show that fatty foods are associated with occurrence of dyspeptic symptoms, and reduction of fat intake may help alleviate symptoms.
So I'm going to stop there for a moment and just make a little comment. If you think about what the confusion that our public has, we're given the message not to eat carbohydrate because that's bad for diabetes, it's bad for your blood sugar, whatever it is. That's a general message that most of us have learned throughout our lifetime. So if we don't eat carbohydrate, what does that lead us to eat? Protein or fat are the other options. So if we're eating a lot of protein and fat, which is the standard American diet or the ketogenic or paleo diets, we're getting high amounts of fat. What does that lead to? What did this video just share with us? It shared higher fat diets. You have more intestinal discomfort. You go to the doctor, you have intestinal discomfort. What does your doctor write for or advise you to do? Pull out the prescription pad, and what's coming? Protonics or omeprazole. It's a pill for every ill. And so then you have potentially the side effects connected with that pill. You're not treating the root cause of what the problem is. And there have been so many people that Scott and I have had experience with who have cleared their GI symptoms by changing to a whole food plant-based diet. And not all of them have done it totally completely. They've transitioned a bit, many of them just enough to where their symptoms clear. But if they want the really best health benefits, I will continue to promote, let's just do plants as best as you can. Tammy, you've got a hand up.
I'm new. I take 40 milligrams of omeprazole a day. And the reason why I take that is that I was misdiagnosed with symptoms of asthma. So it stops a cough and a really bad cough. They thought I was having asthma attacks for 18 years. And so they gave me that and it stopped it.
So you were having reflux that led to the asthmatic type symptoms, yes?
Correct. So they diagnosed me with GERD.
So you have GERD, and did they encourage you to do a whole food plant-based diet so that you would potentially get rid of the GERD?
Not for that symptom, but I just got diagnosed with being diabetic, and yes, they did.
So they recommended the plant-based diet because of diabetes.
Correct.
Well, good for them on that account. But as you learn, as the diabetes is improved on a whole food plant-based diet, you'll likely find your symptoms of GERD. In my experience, a good number of people can reverse their symptoms of GERD and get rid of their acid inhibitors.
Yeah, that would be something I would really like to do. I just started doing the plant-based this week as best as I can because it's new to me. I love fruits and vegetables, but I'm finding I'm eating more fruits, and I don't know that that's good.
It is good, and I'd love to see you get hooked up with Lisa Chick, our third-year med student. She has the time. I think she put her email in the chat room. And then, she would talk with you. It's totally free and help you make a smoother transition. It's sort of like if you wanted to learn to play tennis or play a piano, you could kind of practice on your own and try to figure it out on your own. But if you had a coach that kind of guided you and helped you a little bit, you might do it faster and you might do it better.
And I don't eat a whole lot of meat. If I eat any at all, so that might be a good start for me.
Okay, great.
And just for FYI, if you go back into the class archives, you'll see earlier this year, we had 2 classes on diabetes and they're recorded, so you could watch those if you would like.
Wonderful, thank you.
You were here at the beginning of class, so you saw where the website is and
I came in a half hour late.
Oh, so you're not, are you familiar with the website, the class website?
I just got on it today. I've been wanting to do it for months. And now that I'm newly diagnosed with diabetes, I thought, you know what? I might be late, but I'm going to go listen.
Well, you're very welcome, Tammy. We're happy to have you. And you don't have to speak up if you don't want to, but we'd love to have you ask questions. And maybe, Scott, you could show her one time how to, a brief thing about the website where the diabetes is.
Yeah, I'll share my screen here. And I saw Lisa Chick put her email in the chat, so you can get that. Let me go here. Here's the class website, livelifestylemedicine.com. So I was showing everybody, if you're new to it, you can scroll down halfway down the homepage here and watch the website tutorial here. It's a recording. It'll give you a full tour of the website. But just to show you real quick, if you go to class archives, click on that, and then here's 2023 classes for this year. And here's all the recordings. So if you go back, you'll see here, diabetes part 1 was April 25th. You can watch that. And then May 2nd was part 2. So you could just click here and watch these 2 classes on diabetes or any of the other classes. Also, if you're new to it, you can go back to the beginning and kind of take a while to get caught up, but you could start off with introduction classes, meal preparation planning classes. So there's all these different topics and you can just watch them slowly over time if you want to.
Yes. I need to do something.
Great. Well, are there any other questions from anybody or any other thoughts? I'm just kind of looking around the room to see if there is anybody else. I don't see anybody else raising their hand. I guess we have time for one last video, and it's on diet and GERD. It's a timely topic. So, especially for one who's taking medicine for it. And so let's see, is that the next one? Diet, GERD, and acid reflux, heartburn.
Gastroesophageal reflux disease is one of the most common disorders of the digestive tract. The two most typical symptoms are heartburn and regurgitation of stomach contents up into the back of the throat. But it's not just burning pain and a sour taste in your mouth. It causes millions of doctor visits every year, millions of hospitalizations, and the most feared complication is cancer. You start out with a normal esophagus, and if the acid keeps creeping up, it gets all inflamed, and you can get esophagitis, which can turn into Barrett's esophagus, which can turn into cancer, adenocarcinoma. To prevent all that, we just need to prevent the acid reflux in the first place. In the last 3 decades, the incidence of this cancer in the U.S. has increased 6-fold, an increase greater than that of melanoma, breast, or prostate cancer, and that's because acid reflux is on the rise. In the United States, we're up to like 1 in 4 people suffering at least weekly heartburn and or acid regurgitation, compared to down around 5% in Asia, suggesting dietary factors may play a role. In general, high fat intake is associated with increased risk, whereas high fiber foods appear to be protective. The reasons fat intake may be associated with GERD symptoms and erosive esophagitis is because studies on volunteers have shown that when we eat fatty foods, the sphincter at the top of the stomach that's supposed to keep the food down and the acid down is relaxed in the presence of fat, and so more acid can creep up into the esophagus. For example, if you have volunteers eat a high-fat meal, a McDonald's sausage and egg McMuffin, and compare that to a low-fat meal, McDonald's hotcakes, there was significantly more acid squirted up in the esophagus after the high-fat meal. Then in terms of later stages, over the last 20 years, 45 studies have been published in the association between Barrett's esophagus, esophageal cancer, and diet. In general, they found that meat and high-fat meals appears to increase cancer risk, though different meats were associated with cancers in different places. Red meat was more associated with cancer in the esophagus, but poultry was more associated with cancer at the top of the stomach. Whereas meat alternatives, quote-unquote, such as beans and nuts, were associated with a significantly decreased risk of cancer, consistent with previous data suggesting a protective effect of plant protein sources, as well as fruits, vegetables, and antioxidants in produce form, though not pill form. Those eating the most antioxidant-rich foods had half the odds of esophageal cancer, whereas practically no reduction in risk among those who used vitamin supplements, such as vitamin C or E pills. The most protective produce may be red-orange vegetables, dark green leafies, berry juice, apples, and citrus. But it may not just be the plants. Eating a healthy food crowds out less healthy foods, so it may be a combination of both. Based on a study of 3,000 people, the consumption of non-vegetarian foods was an independent predictor of GERD, which in this study in India presumably included eggs, which are considered non-vegetarian. Egg yolks appear to increase this hormone called cholecystokinin, induces this increase, which may overly relax the sphincter that separates the esophagus from the stomach. The same hormone is increased by meat, which may help explain why vegetarianism appeared to be a protective factor for reflux esophagitis. Researchers found that those eating meat had twice the odds of reflux-induced esophageal inflammation. Therefore, vegetarian diets may offer protection, though it's uncertain, again, whether it's attributable to the absence of meat in the diet or the increased consumption of healthy foods. Vegetarian diets are characterized by greater consumption of fruits and vegetables, containing innumerable phytochemicals, dietary fiber, and antioxidants than omnivores, in addition to just restricting their consumption of the animal sources of food, which tend to be fattier and then can relax that sphincter and aggravate reflux. Bottom line, GERD is common. Its burdens are enormous, it relapses frequency and can cause bleeding and strictures, not to mention a deadly cancer. The mainstay of treatment is the proton pump inhibitors, which rake in billions of dollars. We spend $4 billion on Nexium alone, $3 billion on Prevacid, $2 billion Protonix, $1 billion Acivex. But they can cause nutrient deficiencies, increase the risk of pneumonia, food poisoning, and bone fractures. Thus, it's important to find correctable risk factors and correct them. Known correctable risk factors are things like obesity, smoking, and alcohol consumption. But there hadn't been studies on eating meat versus not eating meat, but now we have another correctable factor to help prevent this disease.
So I would say that's my best attempt at encouraging you along on the path of whole plant foods in an attempt to get those of you who have GERD and are on proton pump inhibitors or reflux medicine to be able to help you get off of those. Any thoughts from anybody? Man,
Next week's
yeah, Scott, there was a lot of chat going on. 18. Thanks for dealing with all that. But go ahead and tell us about next week and your further thoughts.
Yeah, it's next week's an open forum, so great for the new people to come back and hear conversation, ask questions. So it's always interesting, and then we'll see if Charlie will be able to record or not. So if not, make sure you come. If you usually depend on catching the recordings, try to come next week if you can, because we might not be able to record it. We'll see if Charlie can get to his phone being out of town.
Depends on where we're at in Alaska. We're not sure exactly where we'll be next Tuesday, what the reception will be like and all that stuff.
But I'll be here, so.
But Scott will be here, and bring your questions. And for those of you who've been to the classes before, maybe you could share some of your stories with the new people also. Any last thoughts from anyone else before we end tonight's meeting? I'm looking around the room.
And for Tammy, I would say for Tammy, who's new, she missed the first half hour. We do have the Eugene Plant-Based Provider Walk on this coming Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m. at the South Eugene High School track. So you can see the information on that if you sign up for the newsletter, or you can contact me. I can forward you that information since you're new.
And that's this Saturday?
Yeah, Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m. at the South Eugene High School track, right by the tennis courts there. If you know, if you're local here.
Yes.
Charlie, when you get back to Alaska, bring some cold back with you.
Bring some what?
Bring some cold back here.
Some cold, yeah, for the heat. Yeah, it's going to be, I think, in the mid 60s.
I know
is what it looks like.
Nice over there. I lived there 10 years.
Oh, great. Well, we're excited to kind of
It's
see
beautiful.
some new sites.
But not to live there, no, only to visit.
Yeah, we love Oregon. We're now moving. Okay, this has been fun. Scott, thank you very, very much. And thank you for all the rest of you in the group who've contributed, asking questions, whatever. And we love meeting with you every week and look forward to the next time we get together and next week. So Ed, I see you're wiggling your hand by, so it's been fun. And I guess we'll end it here unless you have any last word there, Scott.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we'll see you next week, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.